Greetings and salutations, dear citizens. It is I, Wolfphototech, and here we are with another delightful video. This time I'm covering Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now this is actually an interesting situation. I do have to say that this book, by the way, MSRP is for $60. Okay, whatever they want to say. That's not a terribly thick book for $60. But on to the next thing. Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk, is a update to Phandelver, the Lost Mine of Phandelver, from the starter set, original starter set for 5th edition. I have ran Lost Mine of Phandelver, so I have a bit of experience in that. So let's continue on. This book is levels 1 to 12. It comes with a map in the back of the Phandelver region, as well as a little section on keeping track of the adventure. It comes out to, say, 220 pages. That's a little too loud. Goes out to 220 pages with a few more pages at the end for keeping track of your campaign. There's the map. I should pull the map out and show you. It shows all the important locations in the Phandelver region as it comes to the updated version of Lost Mines of Phandelver, as well as the Shattered Obelisk. Please note that this is actually really nice inclusion up here, the 1 hex equals 5 miles part. Personally, what they should have done is trimmed the map to this size and re-angled it so you have more horizontal range of the map from the coast in. That way you have more adventuring out this area over here. This whole area up here is pretty much completely unused in the adventure. Most of the stuff happens down here, so why not scale it down and take it out that way a little bit. But okay. There's the internal maps for the adventure. Personally, they should all these maps should be on their own pieces of paper or their own physical maps, not thrown on the back of a big map, because it's kind of hard to use a map like this unless you want to go to like a store or something, take a photocopy of one and expand it out on a computer or scan it yourself. So there you go. So the map here is basically like 3 stars. It's really easy to improve upon this map with very little effort at all. Just a little more forethought. You know, all the interior maps should be on their own little small fold-out maps. All the surface map shouldn't just be straight up and down the Sword Coast. It should actually be more centered on the actual adventuring region, as opposed to having the whole adventuring region be pretty much in the bottom 2/3 or the bottom 1/3 with a little bit going up in the middle section and nothing in the top section. That's just a complete waste of space. So there you go. As you can see, I have little tags here in the top of the book that it denotes where the section between the 2 little slips here happens to be where the Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure is. I'm going to pull those out. Those are Andy's mints. You have a nice, simple symbol on the front page. Not a whole lot of effort in that right there. You have the specialty cover inside here. The specialty cover, by the way, is just mostly green with yellow mixed in, as well as black. The first 4 chapters are entirely about the original Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure. In chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all about the Shattered Obelisk section. Now, there's a few really important points, and so I'm going to hit on this here. It's actually a decent table of contents, but not the most amazing one. The front end of this section, by the way, this scene has relative mirroring later on in the book. But there you go. They denote right here in the adventure summary that it's actually in 2 different sections. The Lost Mine section, which references chapters 1 to 4 from the 2014 D&D starter set, and then the Obelisk section, which is chapter 5 to 8. This whole front section right here basically gives you a very simple overview of the events that go down from chapter to chapter, and the setting, which is the Phandalin area around here. As I said before, I'm pointing right at Phandalin on the map. The furthest north place you go to is right here. This whole section up here is completely unused. So they probably should have just brought it further down and centered it over. Now, there's a very important, really important detail I have to discuss quickly. On D&D Beyond, there is a section of this book. There's a extra set of adventures that jump off right after you get done in Phandalin. That's on D&D Beyond. That goes from like level 6 to 7, 8 to 9, 10 to 11 on D&D Beyond. I don't know why they didn't just simply include that in with this book, but okay. And then took the Shattered Obelisk section and leveled it up and pushed that from that level 11 to level 17 or 18 point. But of course, yet again, Wizards of the Coast kind of avoids going past that level 12 barrier. This section right here explains the map, there's options for non-deadly resolutions. I personally feel that when Wizards of the Coast started including this component right here, simply just because they noticed that was a very popular selling point of having the ability to have non-deadly resolutions in Beyond the Witchlight. And yet at the same time in this book right here, at the same time in this adventure, I have read through quite a bit of chunks of it. Non-deadly resolutions is not actually a thing that's in this book. So this entire section right here, the non-deadly resolution section, this is like, they tell you that they have designed this adventure or updated it essentially to allow for that kind of thing. They absolutely did not. This is completely a meaningless little piece of text they threw in there just because it sells books, apparently. And then they also right here say there's a story tracker in the back, which is basically just a section right here for quick notes. But anyways, yeah, the non-deadly resolution part is a complete lie. I've always been very good at integrating non-deadly resolutions into situations in a campaign. And yet again, it does improve adventures, but at the same time, it also degrades them as well. So, if you put in too many options, too much potential for non-deadly resolutions, people start not taking things as seriously anymore, or they become disconnected because it feels like you're just giving them a win. And it doesn't work out. But yet again, if every situation just immediately goes to a fight, then it also feels like, oh, all we can do is really fight. Murder hobo mode. The true solution I've come to is that it generally needs to be somewhere in between. You need some enemies that are completely so hostile to the party that talking things through literally does not work at all. They're blatantly hostile, they're blatantly evil. And then you have other situations where you could, if you play your cards right, either bluff in the direction of bluffing your enemies out, or via compassion or something else. You might be able to get through victories that way as well. But you cannot do heavily one or the other of any of these options. You kind of have to mix them up, because that's the only way you truly get a really good adventure. And then sometimes a player comes up with a really good solution and you bend it towards that direction. But anyways, this non-deadly resolution thing is completely nothing. They're just sticking that in there because it sells. They have... okay, I had to say a few things about this section. This section right here is character creation reference. Tying character backgrounds based on their background to the story of the game and their tie-ins, as well as the adventuring hooks from the first, from the original starter box set. In some ways, they added more granularity, but at the same time, they functionally constricted a few options here and made it more ready, wordy kind of situation, which is counterproductive. The best things I've always found is a little more freedom. Then you have this section down here. By the way, this whole front section is like, it's the start end of Phandalin, but then it also references sections or things that will occur in chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, which I kind of find awkward in itself. However, that is not terrible. So here you go. We have sections on transformations and effects here. By the way, this little blurb right down here by player consent is required for character transformations. Before you use the character transformation rules presented in this section, check with each player to determine if open to the character experience physically transformative effect. A player will not miss game benefits if they choose not to use these rules for their character. This is just utterly terrible. And it's terrible on a massive range of possibilities. And they don't actually give you any tools as to how to work this out. All they do is like warn you, warning, there's this thing, and ding, and first and foremost, the problem with the whole player consent thing here is that if you ask your players if they consent to something, you've told them what's possible in the and what's the scary thing is possible in the adventure, so you lose flexibility and options. And B, if players push or opt out on certain things, or want to experience certain things and others don't, then you have a conflict between players, some not wanting to have a certain element and some do wanting to have a certain element. The correct solution to this is old school OSR philosophy about this. You socialize with your players, you figure out their tolerances for things over time, playing with them in adventures or campaigns, and then you make the decision as the game master to include a component or exclude a component in an adventure, or modify it in such a fashion that it doesn't directly affect the players, but they can still witness it in hand in the adventure itself. So if you go ahead and just ask them, hey, are you okay with spiders? It makes it really weird and awkward. Whereas if you talk with various people and talk about various topics you do and do not like in various media, you sometimes will discover, oh yeah, Timmy has absolute fear of clowns. And it's, you can like ask Jennifer, like, is Timmy like absolutely afraid of clowns? And like, he is afraid of meeting clowns in person, but in games or movies, it scares him, but he's okay. And like, okay, I could like, I understand that I might make a reference to a clown in a game, and the clown is not there in the game, but there is someone referencing a clown in a story, and see where Timmy goes off of that. If Timmy really is concerned about the clown, like you could sweep that under. It's not a thing that actually can come to the forefront in the story or adventure. But if Timmy is okay with clowns or interested in wanting to chase after the clown in the game, then you know that Timmy can actually deal with clowns in his TTRPGs. He just can't stand being around them in person. So there you go. This, as I said, this whole front section is basically just priming you for... The very beginning is just priming you for the Phandalin Lost Mines adventure. And then they throw in stuff for the Shattered Obelisk section after that. And personally, the whole player consent thing is basically an oops, we're going to scare you with this possibility of an issue that some people might have, very few people. And the game master is now left trying to improvise a means of trying to figure out if that issue is a serious issue with his group or her group, or it's just a thing. And of course, the matter of the fact is that Wizards of the Coast warns you about it in a blurb and then does absolute shit nothing about it, trying to help you figure out, hey, how do I fix this issue that is apparently apparent in the TTRPG hobby. Oh, by the way, this is a fun little reminder that I've had people get pissed off about me about saying this in the past. Goblins in Dungeons and Dragons are not green. They are not green. They're tan skinned. Now, this is chapter 1, A Dangerous Journey. This is basically the beginning section of Lost Mines of Phandelver. This is the classic Goblin Ambush section. It's nice that they've now included a map in here. Personally, I like my original map I drew for this Goblin Ambush situation. It was a lot better. And also, my map made more sense. In the story of the Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure, there was a cart and dead horses in the street here. They changed it to a downgrade. Yet again, goblins are not green in Dungeons and Dragons. They're tan. They're tan to brown. I love this cave. That was an awesome experience right there, I do have to say. It goes through quite a few pages here. They expanded out a lot of sections right here. They took the Silver Hallwinter stat block that was in the back of the book in Lost Mines of Phandelver and moved it up to the front here, which is a nice touch. You don't have to look for it. I do have to state that there's a few small side problems in this as you go through this adventure, that they periodically in the Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure, they will take stuff from the Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure and change it for this updated version, the Shattered Obelisk. Half of the things are zero weight bearing, you could continue from this box set unaffected, except you have to then read through this book, see what they've changed in this book, and then change it back to how they had it in this one. So you have continual flow of continuity. They retconned a few character races and background stories of some characters and etc. in this new retelling of the Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure in this version. So if you were running this one, you're going to have to reread through this book and then take post-it notes and stick them in at various spots, like changing Eldermath back to what he was before and clearing all that stuff up, because it has zero weight bearing whatsoever. They changed the character from one race to another, one class to another, from male to female. Zero change. That has zero effect on how the story plays out. It's just them just flipping some stuff around. Now, there's a really massive problem in that. When you retcon or change stuff like that, if people have experienced the original version and now they're playing the new version, you have now created a situation where you have drawn attention to something that is completely non-weight bearing in the adventure. And the moment you ever do that as a writer, you have horribly, horribly damaged the quality of the story on a massive level. If you're telling a story. Now, this is not a story, this is a game, but at the same time, you have just now made it clear the intentions or desires of the writing staff at the time, and the fact that they've altered stuff for literally no reason other than to check a different checkbox off draws attention to the story is not first, checkboxes are first. The story should be how it is, and it should just flow, and you can mix in races, backgrounds, etc., into the story. But when you do that, you should continue on with that, and the best option is to add new characters in that fit those criteria. So instead of changing a human into a dark elf, and a guy into a female, what you simply should do is just add another character in that happens to have a similar story, and those two have an interaction, like a male druid talks with the female druid, and so forth, and continue from there. And that builds in the story world and expands it. When you start just flipping characters, you diminish it because you make it more obvious that it's just some author or writer trying to tweak things to fit other people's sensibilities. So don't do the flipping thing, do the addition thing. So that is one of the ongoing problems in this book, is that they flip stuff to change the checkboxes, and it has no weight whatsoever to the story. But because people have played or ran the previous one for so long, now it may have bearing on the story, because dungeon masters have altered the story and may have included or added new elements into the adventure that then, if you run stuff from this one, the Shattered Obelisk, then you now have conflicts or story incongruities, continuity errors occurring. So there you go. So now, first and foremost, on that side, you have now created extra work for the Dungeon Master, because now the Dungeon Master has to go through the entire book and edit, put post-it notes wherever the characters show up that they changed gender or sex and changed class or race from this one to this one in this book. You just made more work. Now, the other thing is that, oh, you could just go through and bear no weight. Well, they've also added some other stuff like the strange goblins, which these new psionic goblins are cool as heck. Some of the stuff does have weight bearing. So if it was all completely unweight bearing stuff changes, they did it for Lost Mines of Phandelver in the beginning of the Shattered Obelisk versus the original version. It's like, oh, it's not a problem. You just run that, and then you go right into this, and you start from chapter 5, and you just continue on. But now that they've changed stuff in this version of Lost Mines of Phandelver and the Shattered Obelisk, you now have to read through chapter 1 to 4 to find the stuff, to see, hey, there might have been this thing or that thing, and then I could work it in somewhere else later on or such. So the biggest thing for adventures is to not create more work for the game master than is necessary, or create any work that requires them to have to undo to redo something. So there you go. So that's the problem with this first section of the Shattered Obelisk. By the way, I simply love some of the artwork here for some of the bosses. I really do like the fact that they put Clark up here as a king on his throne of crates. I really played up that effect that he was like a king, or exceedingly arrogant and dumb. And, players like to, ha 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 ha, we're gonna take you down, you dumb, arrogant oaf. And then the party almost TPKs against them. And that's the other fun thing I ended up with in the adventure of Lost Mines of Phandelver, is that every time the party ran up against bugbears, if they did not somehow talk their way out of the fight or get around them through some form of trickery, and it actually did get into a fight, the single bugbear would almost TPK the whole party. They either would just somehow manage to overcome them, or they would get captured. So that was actually a whole fun thing right there. Then we go into Troubles in Phandalin. And I do say that this has actually been updated and has been streamlined a little bit more to make it easier to run than it was in the original version in the starter set. So they did do some good stuff to update a few things. But yet again, at the same time, this is also a situation where this is right where the first section of where they started changing things for no apparent reason other than to meet checkboxes, which then results in you having to either go through this entire adventure and rewrite all the characters back to this version if you started running this one before this, or retcon backwards, and that doesn't work. That's a bad idea. So there you go. They did, by the way, blow a bunch of things up in here and make it a little bit longer. This is the thing with Wizards of the Coast. They tend to put too many words into a thing, and you're like, oh, okay, that's way more information than I need. And then there's the things where they put nothing into it, and well, that's the thing I really would need. If I was a completely new game master, that's the information I truly need. So it's one of those strange things where I do like the fact that they include the Zentarum pin and the Harper's pin and stuff. It's nice to always have like a piece of artwork or a prop item or a character to just break up all the text, so it makes it easier to keep track of where everything's going. This is the Red Brand's hideout. This is actually a really fun story I had with this one. The party had some really intense moments of terror in this hideout, which then turns into, on the back half of the whole hideout, into a comedy skit of Why are all the enemies in this place stupid? And then there's also the whole second dungeon. This is the first time, by the way, the Red Band's hideout was also the first time I started adding second dungeons into a dungeon. Because I actually added a whole new section out of R11. A whole new maze just based around the rat. So there you go. So then we go through here, the armory and everything else. The Nothic. The Nothic was quite hard to play properly to various players because the lore and the stat block kind of like clash up with each other just a little bit. So you end up having to pay attention to some details like the exact languages. My party never actually managed to fight Iarno Glassstaff Ulbrich at all. They literally did not manage to fight him. The rat in R11 basically held up the party so long that Iarno escaped. He got away with a whole bunch of cool stuff that they would have loved to have if they could have gotten to him and beat him. I'm quite sure that they're watching this video and like, oh no, there was cool magic items we could have got. But anyways, Chapter 3 is the Spider's Web. This section goes over all the little side missions like the Agatha, the Old Owl Well, and Consberry. They did add a few new fun things in here. By the way, there's the random roll table for all the party members that were all the people that were in my campaign. That there was way too many random encounters. I had too many owl bears. Yeah, that's what happened. Now, Old Owl, they added a map for Old Owl Well, which is nice. I had to improvise that. And then there's the Ruins of Thunder Tree. The party never actually went there. And then they also added a map for Wyvern Torn. I had to improvise an entirely new map for this. And I personally feel that my version of the map is better than what they had here. Because my version actually had multiple chambers. Where this is just a crevasse you just go into. And you just walk down the crevasse. And there's a passage to the left that goes right into a cave. And everyone's inside that cave. Where mine had a series of hills in front of it, with a path that snaked between the hills, and there was orc archers on top of the hills, and the party fought them. They went around the corner between the hills. They went down a little ravine. They found an entrance to a cave system. The cave system went in. It split into multiple different paths. The party followed one path to the right, and then the whole story took a turn for the crazy. I also added a fire elemental into that as well. Interestingly enough, they fought Old Owl Well and Wyvern Torn after Cragmaw Castle. And here's Cragmaw Castle. And that turned into a double adventure right there because the party got captured. Goblins in the kitchen. There were so many goblins, the barbarian ran out of rages before he could get past the first few doors. And then there's Wave Echo Cave. And then there is random wandering monster table for Wave Echo Cave. The dwarves. And the bugbears following the dwarves. And there's all kinds of crazy, scary monsters in Wave Echo Cave. And then Paths of Peril, which is Chapter 5, which is the beginning of the Shattered Obelisk section. And I really do like all the increasing crime and craziness. Now, the problem with this is that the crimes and the craziness kind of run contrary to the direction I was going with my Lost Mines of Phandelver campaign. Phandelver was becoming safer and more inviting to the party, and then to have it all of a sudden go crazy and crimes and violence starts outbreaking in the town is probably quite jarring to the party. A few more caves. Interesting enough, a lot of these caves and dungeons are actually exceedingly oversimplified to a degree, and it's actually kind of concerning in that nature. And as I was flipping through this, it feels more like a good chunk of the stuff that specifically ties Lost Mines of Phandelver and the Shattered Obelisk together as stories are really loose, and they're very simplified and just plugged in. So a part of me almost feels like that the Shattered Obelisk section of this book was originally going to be intended as its own standalone adventure. And then at some strange point or reason, Wizards of the Coast kind of just bolted it on to Lost Mines of Phandelver, and then they rewrote some stuff into Lost Mines of Phandelver that ties it into the Shattered Obelisk, yet all the components that really tie the two together are just really loose and weak. It's kind of obvious that it was kind of rushed together. However, the Shattered Obelisk section is much better built than the connections it has to the Lost Mines of Phandelver. And the Lost Mines of Phandelver is much better built than the connections it has to the Shattered Obelisk. So you have a situation where you have these two stories with little loose threads tying them together, like knotted, very half-assed in some ways, or completely, entirely unhalf-assed. Like someone made a loop of one and just hung the other one through the loop. Like, okay. So this does feel like a situation where the two adventures, this was one thing, the Shattered Obelisk was something else, and they just stuck it on and they hammered nails between the two together. And they didn't put a whole lot of effort into making the nails go into the right spots. But anyways, this is a whole lot of new stuff right here. We got mutating cows and stuff like that. Skip through this section a little bit more. As this is much newer, as you go through the adventure, it's a combination of horror and it starts getting into more of the darker monsters. But then we go back here into the section here. You happen to have the two stuff from both adventures tied together in this piece of artwork. You have the bestiary. You have a lot of new mid-tier monsters in this bestiary, like the Aberrant Zealot and the Ash White and the Psionic Ash White. By the way, they added a few new creatures in here, like some of the psionic creatures. Like a Psionic Ash White or the Ash Zombies from Lost Mines of Phandelver were included in here. They included all the unique monsters that are not a part of the monster manual in this book. So, as I said before, it's all CR 3 to 11 creatures in here, with a few that are lower in level than that. This piece of artwork is actually from, I think it's from Volo's Guide to Monsters, or was it from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes? But this was specifically for another type of lithid. I believe it was some kind of actually, it was that piece of artwork for a vampire lithid? Yeah, I think this is actually a piece of artwork for a vampire lithid, which might be from some other adventure. But it's interesting that they reused a piece of artwork for one other creature, another type of Mind Flyer, and then they just relabeled it as a Mind Flyer Prophet. Like just lazy copy and paste. Got some mutated creatures, mutated cloaker, humanoid, and Otiug. An Oculorb, psionic goblins, and then you have the Red Band Ruffian stat block right down here. And then you have all the magic items back here. These magic items right here are actually kind of nice. Interestingly enough, the mind crystals, I actually started integrating more crystals into my version of Lost Mines of Phandelver. So there you go. However, that was before these ever came out. So I would have, if I was running my Lost Mines of Phandelver campaign, I would definitely have included these in that as well. Mud Slick Tower, I don't know why. There's a few occasions in here where they just simply take like a magic item and they stick one new thing on it and then they rename the entire magic item into something else. There's the Spider Staff and the Staff of Defense. This is actually a strange situation of, you know, you have a Staff of Defense. It's in here, and is that in the player's? Is that in the Dungeon Master's Guide? And then you have when they excluded all the monsters from that were in the Lost Mines of Phandelver version of this adventure. My notebook from when I was running that. But yet again, as I said before, there is a lot of monsters that are included in the back here, as well as a bunch of magic items that they pulled out of this Shattered Obelisk. So, yeah. Now, there is a lot of really cool stuff in here. I really do like the psionic goblins and the mind flyers and all that other stuff. And I do like the horror and the Cthulhu-esque vibes that's permeates into this. However, I do feel that I don't really feel that Wizards of the Coast really should have taken Lost Mines of Phandelver and then just plugged the Shattered Obelisk right on top of that. As I said before, this section right here is entirely Lost Mines of Phandelver. And all the rest of this is Shattered Obelisk right here. Now, Wizards of the Coast probably could have just like left out the Lost Mines of Phandelver section from this adventure and then just added more stuff into the Shattered Obelisk, because you would have lost, oh, by the way, you probably lost like 50 pages. Oh, 60. You'd have lost like something like 60 pages if you removed Lost Mines of Phandelver from this book. And 60 pages would have taken this book from just barely over, and I mean just barely over, something like, I said at the beginning of the video, 120 pages, down to 150 pages. No, 140 pages, which would have made it one of the thinner adventures. So, yeah. Personally, if you've already ran Lost Mines of Phandelver. This is a nice extension onto it. However, you end up having to do a lot of work trying to correct or rewrite the parts that Wizard of the Coast changed between the two. And then you also have to spend your time figuring out what of those parts matters and what doesn't matter. So, there you go. This actually has some magic items, some monsters. It has some good horror, body horror-esque components thrown in, so that'd be fun in itself. How would I say this? This is probably like, this is one of those situations where, I got into like got a little bit of annoyed with the whole there was that slight issue with the reprinting of material in a previous book that I came through. And everything else in that book was really good, except for the few pieces that were reprinted from another book. And oddly enough, that other book required those two books, and the stuff that was reprinted in the second supplement book was from the previous book that you would still need for the stuff in the second book. And that was annoying in itself because you don't need to reprint the stuff if you already bought it the first time around. And the starter set, Lost Mines of Phandelver, is most commonly cited as one of the best adventures for your D&D campaign starting out. And lots of people, when they first start into Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, Lost Mines of Phandelver is oftentimes one of the first ones they play through. First time game masters, first time players, and so forth. So a lot of people have played through Lost Mines of Phandelver already, and they have probably come up with a level 6 section, a level 8 section, a level 9 adventures, etc., etc. There was also those adventures on D&D Beyond that tie into it as well. I can't remember if those are specifically for Lost Mines of Phandelver or the Dragon of Icespire Peak story from the Essentials kit. But reprinting Lost Mines of Phandelver into this book right here bloats up the pages, and being that this is $60, odds are you've already played at least $30 of that $60 already. You already own that. So you bought the Lost Mines of Phandelver twice. If you have bought this on D&D Beyond, you have now bought the same thing 4 times. But this time, Lost Mines of Phandelver come with the Shattered Obelisk in this book right here. I personally would have much rather not have had Wizard's Coast reprint Lost Mines of Phandelver in this book. And just simply have created either a new beginning section, had a new beginning section for the Shattered Obelisk, like an alt story for Lost Mines of Phandelver. Another adventure that starts in the Phandalin area. Maybe have it start another 10 or 20 years after Phandelver. Or another 20. The Essentials Kit adventure, Dragon of Icespire Peak, takes place like 10 years, 5 to 10 years after the Lost Mines of Phandelver. So you had this one another 5 to 10 years after that. So you have a 20-year time span or 30 years time span between the first one and this third one here. And that would have worked out. You have a new beginning adventure section in this one, and then that would be an entirely pure addition in value to the players and the game master. But instead, now you've just bought Lost Mines of Phandelver again with Shattered Obelisk added on to the back end of it. And the connections between the two are very weak in themselves. So, it's hard to grade it off of something like that. I really don't like reprinting stuff in later books. And the worst thing of all that Wizards of the Coast did when they reprinted Lost Mine of Phandelver was start to... It can't even stand up on its own. But anyways, the worst thing they did was just change a bunch of stuff in the adventure. So now it forces the Game Master, even if the Game Master retired his party at the end of Lost Mine of Phandelver in the original starter set, and he or she was going to then, oh, by the way, Wizards of the Coast just happens to have released the Shattered Obelisk, and he said, let's go ahead and take those level 5 characters that we stopped at Lost Mines of Phandelver and start it back up into the Shattered Obelisk. Now the Game Master has to go through the Shattered Obelisk section and then rewrite stuff to match up with the Lost Mines of Phandelver. So, there you go. Part of the appeal of modules is to have something that is already made that you don't have to do a whole lot of modification to, but modification is a bonus. Like, I really like to take an adventure, run it through, and then just stick in an extra dungeon, stick in some new enemies from a different book, stick in this NPC that appears on the journey between 2 points into which the characters interact. I like that. What I don't like is having to rewrite stuff that was already written that I was not going to have to rewrite already. And the problem with the Shattered Obelisk is it includes stuff that conflicts with the original starter set. And some of the stuff has weight bearing, and some of the stuff is completely irrelevant. And when you notice, when the thing that has changed, both versions have no relevance on the story, it only highlights the lack of artistic integrity and creativity that is going into the process. And that just diminishes the whole situation. So, the Shattered Obelisk is in this fun little situation where they made the Lost Mines of Phandelver section a little more starter friendly, but then also made it slightly less starter friendly in other areas. And they swapped stuff that has no reason to be swapped, and then there's some stuff that is swapped that actually does have a reason, but then you have to rework it backwards if you've already done it. This is one of those situations where a 10-year-ish gap between the original and the updated version highlights why you shouldn't come up with a sequel or an update really long after the fact. Unless it's like for an entirely new edition. In which case, then you would just run the adventure as a new adventure through the new edition with new characters, and you get to alter it from there. But yeah, people are still running the original starter set at this time, and they're gonna like, oh yes, let's go for it and pick up the Shattered Obelisk. And then they discover that they have to, the Game Master has to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff in the Shattered Obelisk just because Wizards of the Coast felt like they needed to change a few things, and those things that they changed have no reason to change them. So this is a situation where if Wizards of the Coast didn't do the weird inconsistencies they did and change some things and not add to the other things, and omit stuff from here and there, and it would be so much easier. And also, it would be just easier if they didn't include the Lost Mines of Phandelver, so you could just plop it in right behind everything else, and you didn't have to buy Lost Mines of Phandelver twice. Or, in the case of D&D Beyond, 3 to 4 times. Or in the case of Roll20 plus D&D Beyond, a total of 6 times. And you don't really want to be buying the exact same thing, or even a 90% the same thing multiple times. That's a great way to lose money in life. Buying multiple copies of the same exact thing, or the almost 90% the same thing. So, in the case of the Shattered Obelisk, if you are going to go out and buy the Shattered Obelisk, if you're new to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you have very little to no reason to even bother considering buying the starter set that came before it, because you get most of the stuff in here anyways from the starter set, but you now have to go and buy a Game Master's Guide, and you also have to go and buy the Monster Manual, because they didn't include all the monsters that are in this adventure, in the Shattered Obelisk, in this book, where they did include all that stuff, plus dice and a bunch of other player aid and a few other things and guide information in this one. So as I said before, they wrote parts of it to be more beginner friendly, and then yet at the same time they made it less beginner friendly in other areas. So if you're going to buy this, you buy just this. You're going to buy this, you go ahead and just buy this. If you want to buy both, you might as well buy if you're going to buy both, I advise that you read through this one first, and then this one, rewrite your own version of the Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure section, and then use the stuff you want from these two here. Which then you have this terrible situation of you're now buying same section twice. So, considering that whole, this is basically 3 stars. It would have been better off if they didn't just tack in Lost Mines of Phandelver and literally just rewrote a new starter section, a new beginning adventure, that 1 to 5 level section for this, and then just shipped it out, as opposed to just sticking Lost Mines of Phandelver in it. That complicates things. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a delightful day, a nice night, a wonderful weekend, a magnificent month, and see you next time. Ciao.